din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's Decline and Fall live show for you today. So we hope that you're all ready, and now I'll bring in my comrade, co-host, and co-conspirator. It's Kit Clarenberg in the once and future socialist Yugoslavia. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hello and hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today on for our live broadcast. It promises to be an exciting one, and if it fails to excite your appetite for Decline and Fall, then please drop us a complaint or something. But yes, thanks very much for joining us today. It's good to see there's quite a few of you already kind of online with us. So let's leap in, shall we?
Right. Well, like all TV shows, particularly those run by Americans, the Vladimir Zelensky show has gone on for a number of seasons now, but may ultimately be reaching the end of its run. They've tried different showrunners. Ultimately, though, the main character became distinctly unbelievable, and the actor concerned and his, shall we say, tendency towards consumption of large amounts of Colombia's worst export meant that the management of the show became fundamentally unsustainable. What I'm talking about, of course, is the so-called president and his inner circle coming under an increasing amount of pressure from, well, the very people who've been his sponsors and paymasters for many, many years. This, of course, includes the Americans, the British are in the mix, but all Europeans. And what we've seen over the last few days is the so-called justice minister and the energy minister both resign. And apparently, them and their immediate coterie of co-conspirators flee the country into one going to the United States and the other one apparently going to Israel. Funny. Zelensky did say he wanted Ukraine to be a big Israel, so I guess there is that in common. So, Kit, over from your vantage point, is this a sign of the sponsors finally pulling their money from the long-running Zelensky show? And what might be the cause of this? Because the Zelensky clique's been as corrupt as, well, everybody else in Ukrainian politics. So why now for this particular?
Well, I think as we've discussed before, at the risk of repeating ourselves, I just think it's gotten to the point now where Zelensky is basically toast from every conceivable angle. So, he is domestically very unpopular. If you look at polls, his ratings are in the toilet. He is being openly threatened by the Ukraine's very powerful far right paramilitary factions. Like they're openly threatening his life if he dares even talk about negotiations, despite the fact that the war was lost a long time ago, and now it's basically the only remaining question is how much more territory Russia is going to end up taking. And despite this, he is obviously desperate to negotiate something because things could get considerably worse. We're currently seeing 12-hour blackouts, every day in Ukraine due to Russian strikes on Ukrainian energy. Yes, we've mentioned before, it does seem that Zelensky, the former Ukrainian Armed Forces general, now the Kiev's ambassador to London, is being groomed as his replacement. He has spoken about creating a political party, running for president, trying to get candidates in parliament, etc. Now, from the perspective of Kiev's Western puppet masters, this probably seems like a really cheap, easy fix. Like, okay, so we're going to get this much venerated general in, so that will give us a PR boost. He's someone who has made his far right affinities very clear. So he doesn't have to worry about getting assassinated or couped. He's also someone who, for financial and political and personal reasons, will probably just be happy to just keep this running. In the hope that it goes on so long that finally America and Europe are able to produce weapons to give to whatever remains of Ukraine's population to just keep fighting several years down the line. But the problem with this, to paraphrase Blackadder, is it's bollocks. It doesn't matter who is in power in Kiev, or whoever's, whatever placeholder claims to be president. This is over now. This is finished. And I might add that just as a bit of background here, it's really interesting that Owen Matthews is leading the charge on this, because he is a long-time kind of Kiev ultra. Like, he's very, very pro-Maidan. And he writes for The Spectator, but also The Telegraph. And in mid-2023, he published this book called Overreach, which it was this kind of pseudo-psychological account of why Putin fought his unprovoked war of choice against Ukraine in February 2022. And he engages in all sorts of pseudo-psychological reimaginings of how Putin wants to create this kind of illegitimate modern-day hybrid of the Tsarist Empire and the Soviet Union. But Matthews concluded that Putin will leave no lasting ideological legacy or any legacy at all, and he has destroyed Russia's future. And then you fast forward literally 6 months, and Matthews wrote an op-ed for the Spectator saying, "Oh yeah, well, Ukraine's actually kind of lost this." And that was at the end of 2023, when and this is now 2 years later. So I might add as well that Matthews was, when there was all of that fun and games over the US-run NABU, or NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, blah blah, with Zelensky trying to take it under his control. Matthews was leading the charge in terms of saying, this means that Zelensky's reign is no longer tenable and he must go. So it does tend to suggest that the fact that he's now leading the charge again, saying that this is the scandal that could lead Zelensky down, he might be getting briefing notes from someone on what to say, and there may have been a decision made to get rid of Zelensky, for sure. And I might add as well, what's quite funny is this photo featured in the Spectator piece is comparatively flattering, given some of the photos they're using to illustrate Zelensky now, where he just looks haggard and has this kind of thousand yard stare. And then this is someone who, of course, when he was Time Person of the Year, they made his eyes blue. And as handsome as possible. So I mean, I do the details of the corruption scandal itself, I mean, they are pretty dire. But it must be. I mean, this is hardly surprising for one of the most corrupt. It's one of the most corrupt countries in the world, where before the war it was calculated about a quarter of the country's GDP was lost to corruption annually. So I mean, it's hardly surprising that the people within the power structure have been using the war to line their pockets. Of course, there is the reports of one of the individuals involved in this who fled Ukraine having a golden toilet, and cupboards full of money. Not really surprising. The fact that it's suddenly an issue now, and apparently the FBI is looking into this as well. So it's clearly not just restricted to Ukraine. This could be the end of Zelensky. But it will achieve nothing.
No, and I am reminded of the fact that The US, when it gets into extreme difficulty in its proxy wars, likes to swap out its puppets. So, for instance, in Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai was the man for many years until finally he wasn't. And then they were going to, and then it was suddenly, well, this guy, this Ashraf Ghani guy, well, he used to work for the World Bank. So therefore he's got, it turned out that he had all the power of like a wet piece of toilet paper. When it came to when push came to shove, or if you want to go back further, the swapping out of various different military leaders from South Vietnam over and over again, and again didn't produce any different results. But just on the Ukrainian corruption side of things, as you said, like Ukraine has been governed by some stunningly corrupt assholes since it got so-called independence in 1991, which in reality was real independence to in any degree, due to the fact that the corrupt elites that took over were all owned by, well, the West from very early on, and that only got worse with time. So much like, though, the Western nations themselves, when a corruption case is brought, say, in Britain or the United States, it doesn't mean that that corruption is suddenly being taken seriously. It means that the person concerned has outlived their usefulness and they need to be ushered off the page. Thus, it was the case when Boris Johnson in Britain, they dug up like some stuff about him, like breaking COVID regulations to try and damage him. There's all kinds of other corrupt shit that Johnson had been doing for years and years and years. And they got him on what, like, you know, the fact that he had a really boring party in Downing Street. There was far worse things that he'd done. But the point is, like, the law breaking, the standard corruption, the petty corruption, all of that only matters when you've outlived your usefulness. Now, the delusion here is that by personnel in Bankova, that somehow that the war will get revived, that the enthusiasm will be revived. The problem isn't the leadership, though, as such, so that's part of it. The problem is that the Ukrainian population, it seems, from judging from the outside, has had enough of the war, had enough of the Maidan regime, and had enough of being bundled into the back of transit vans and dispatched to a front line, which is slowly collapsing. And this is, of course, linked to the front lines. The fall of Pokrovsk and the more rapid advance of the Russians, not just in that section of the battlefield, but also down in Kherson, Asia region as well, the Russians pushing there. There's the stories of the Russians actually mobilizing more men now to push on to end the Kiev regime militarily, which is why suddenly the Trump administration is now talking about, oh, well, maybe we'll have that meeting with Putin after all. That was a waste of time a couple of weeks ago. Now it's suddenly back on the agenda again. And the only reason why it would be back on the agenda is because the war is going exceedingly badly and everybody can see it. And no matter how hard, like the Europeans or Keir Starmer try and pretend that they've got some great master plan, they don't. The Ukrainians have very little left in the tank. Nobody has the war material left to them. And if you swapped out Zelensky for Zaluzhny, all that would do was basically rearrange the upper echelons of a very corrupt and very Ukrainian state. The other point I wanted to finish on was the reason why the energy minister has gone. He's partly scapegoating because of the very successful Russian targeting of the energy system, but also because, like, they were meant to, when the Russians first targeted the energy system 2 years ago, the energy ministry was supposed to reinforce the energy the power distribution system across the country. There was budgets assigned for that, and it seems like nothing was done. The money all just went missing. So the question is, well, where did it go? You'll probably find it in a Swiss bank account or stashed in the United States somewhere.
Indeed, and I think as well that It's interesting that I mean, as you mentioned, I think that in the manner of Boris Johnson, that the EU and the US, they're looking for some issue to try and take Zelensky down when they've got 101 other things that he's done, which would be far more legitimate grounds, his assassinations of political rivals, the banning of opposition parties, the banning of opposition media, and the jailing of government critics, including Gonzalo Lira, of course, who died in a Ukrainian prison where he claimed he was being tortured. And there's Bogdan Sarityuk, who is a kind of left-wing anti-Zelensky journalist who is rotting in a high-security prison for writing articles critical of Zelensky while also being critical of Russia. On accusations that he was working for the Russians, so it's like, it appears they are looking for a way to get rid of him, and corruption is because it's like fish to water in Ukraine. You don't have to dig very deep anywhere to find it. It's a kind of clean and effective way of getting rid of Zelensky without too many questions being asked. But there's another aspect to this, and I'm just speculating here, but as we have again documented in some what some people might say stultifying detail, this ridiculous, never-ending, quote-unquote, debate in the European Union about getting money to Ukraine, and the constant toing and froing over whether to use frozen Russian assets to support Kiev, etc. I see that today von der Leyen has rather quietly said that, well, maybe we could all just, and we kind of called this on our last show, I think, that the Europeans were going to try and shift the burden of Ukraine, of keeping Ukraine's lights on, quite literally, to EU taxpayers. Von der Leyen is now saying that yes, a reparation loan, emphasis on loan, might be the most effective way to support Ukraine. Now, if you get rid of supposedly corrupt president and then Zelensky, and then replace him with, say, venerated, spotless General Zelensky, it is maybe an easier sell. At least that's what they're banking on. That it might be an easier sell to Europeans that, oh yeah, we're going to give all your money to Ukraine, but it won't be used for corrupt purposes this time. As we've discussed, this has been an ongoing issue for Brussels since the very start of this. With every few months we get a flurry of, we're definitely going to unfreeze Russia's assets and just give them to Ukraine, and then this can be used to pay salaries and fund reconstruction and fund weapons, and then they get cold feet because they realize it's suicide. Perhaps again within the Western imperial brain trust, which is an oxymoron at the best of times, perhaps they feel that if there's a quote unquote clean slate in terms of who's the figureheads involved in this, maybe it will be easier to just keep sinking endless money into this unwinnable quagmire.
Well, some people still believe, the New York Times still believe, and Keir Starmer still believes. They've had their latest very successful, apparently, meeting where they talked about making commitments to Ukraine in terms of weapons and new sanctions on Russia, etc., etc. But if you read through the New York Times article, what it amounts to is a series of announcements, a series of verbal commitments only, which again is at the essence of all of the support in recent months has turned into, again, a lot of verbal stuff and very little concrete, because as we've covered before, the problem that they've got isn't just that they're running out of money and that they're like quite literally having to like print money and accumulate debt inside all of these countries to continue and prop up the Kiev regime. It's that they physically don't have the weaponry to provide anymore. So even if, and again we covered this last time, they provided the Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. These would be in limited numbers, and these aren't easily replaceable inside the United States. So again, like we could probably do a whole special on just where does the U.S. military budget go? But you've got close up to $1 trillion every single year, every single financial year, going through the Pentagon and being spent on fuck knows what. But it doesn't appear to actually produce a higher production of war material. That, and you've got the added problem that the Chinese keep slapping restrictions on rare earth metal exports to the United States because they say they don't want the United States using it to produce weaponry, which is what they would use it for. So you've got delusion going on that if they can just keep it going, I mean, we'll come to a crazy NATO propaganda video later, but the level of delusion that they're currently laboring under is that if they can just keep things, if they can just preserve the Kiev regime. See, what this New York Times article talks about is preserving it, in terms of negotiating a temporary cessation of violence, cessation of the war, with the idea that by 2030, everybody will be, Europe and the United States will have everything sorted out. They'll be ready to go. They'll be ready to take another swing at the Russians, and they'll have built up the Kiev regime again to have another go. This is insane because everybody knows there's a number of insane factors in this calculation. One is that there's no indication that they would be able to increase the amount of war material production enough to try and compete with the Russians by 2030. The other insane calculation is that somehow the Ukrainian population isn't just going to immediately flee en masse to Russia and to the Russian-held territories and will deny the NATO countries an army. And the third delusion is that the Russians would ever allow this to happen. Like, they keep thinking that somehow that the Russians that this is, still a nation that is under the influence of Boris Yeltsin, that they're going to somehow agree to essentially let NATO control 2/3 of Ukraine and turn it into a military encampment when the war started, for precisely the reason that they wanted to stop that happening. So all of this 2030 rhetoric they keep coming out with depends on like a series of complete fantasies. Can only really come true inside the minds of like NATO war planners, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely, and I do think that the West, despite the fact that on a pretty much daily basis, if not more frequently, Western powers are being confronted with their lack of power. And the limitations of their economic and political and military strength, and indeed the rapidity of their decline and fall. Shout out to the show. The fact of the matter is that the level of hubris and delusion, it is very real, and it's one hell of a drug, right? Because when you're winning and you've never lost, and you control the world, as Westerners, particularly the Anglo-Americans, still very much seem to believe, despite all of the evidence to the contrary. There's all sorts of fantasies are it's a fecund environment for fantasies to and kind of grand delusional plans to percolate, but also as well the kind of worldview of the people who are in positions of power, or putatively in positions of power, they're still playing catch up with 20 years ago. In many ways. So to give you just two examples, and this ties in with if you've not seen it, dear viewers and listeners, I would urge you to check out our interview with the academic Harry Blaine about the the Dayton agreements, which brought the horrific war in Bosnia to an end in late 1995. If you look at a lot of the kind of the file the declassified file trail around Dayton. There's all sorts of references to how, we do have to probably square the Russians on this agreement because it will entail a mass Western, US-led occupation of parts of the former Yugoslavia, which many Russians view as their traditional sphere of influence. And there's an amazing quote where in a one CIA file, which refers to this notion of Russian spheres of influence as an argument that should not be taken very seriously in today's world. Like they genuinely believed, right, we're the masters of the universe and we don't have to worry about any other country's national interests or wishes or red lines whatsoever. And it's led us to where we are now. And likewise, similarly, I think, we talk about all of the, this money being, in last week's episode, we had a good old laugh about Britain having spent many years, many billions, creating a kind of light armored tank which can't shoot while moving and can't reverse over like more than inclines of greater than 20 centimeters, and has led to hundreds of soldiers who tested these vehicles losing their hearing because it's so loud. There's still an enormous amount of money being invested in all of this kind of war material, which is completely irrelevant now. Like you have Ukrainian fighters in the mainstream media saying the era of the tank is over because you can't use them for making advances anymore because they just get destroyed by drones. And Russia's drone range, it gets bigger and bigger on a weekly basis. They are striking positions and people and vehicles 30 or 40 kilometers from the supposed front line. But there's still there still seems to be the sense within the corridors of power in Brussels and Washington. It's like, oh well, if we make this jet or this particular tank or this this Wunderwaffe, we can win this thing. It'll just take us a bit of time, but we'll get there. And then with zero consideration. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, just hang on till 2030, and it'll all be fine.
Yeah, indeed. And it's just like, it's genuinely that there is this notion of like, oh well, if we just hang on and hold hands, and things will miraculously get better. And I think this kind of quite neatly closes out this section. I remember very, very well at the start of this year that we were told by Ukrainian ultras and media pundits and think tank morons and also senior Ukrainian military officials that at some stage at some stage Russia's going to run out of momentum and then Ukraine will stage a counterattack. And there has been zero Ukrainian counterattack this year. The Russian advances are getting more relentless. There's been zero fight back. There have, however, been a number of incredibly stupid, botched operations, which seem to have been cooked up by our dear friends in MI6. Hi, guys, we know that you're watching. We discussed last week there was an effort to extract a bunch of potentially senior Western military apparatchiks from Pokrovsk in a daring helicopter raid that went about as wrong as it's possible to go wrong. And we fast forward to today, and Russian intelligence has made some pretty bold claims, Alex.
Yes, indeed. Apparently, the British put together a James Bond type plan, presumably whilst under the influence of a large amount of brandy and Zelensky's favorite products, and whilst watching a sort of Pierce Brosnan era James Bond movie, they decided that, yes, we could go and steal a MiG-31 jet. And this will, of course, play very, very well. And it will be... it will give us a huge advantage. They've apparently been trying to recruit Russian pilots to steal MiG-31s, offering them like $3 million a go. And this has, of course, not worked. And of course, links to the fact that the Ukraine doesn't have an air force. The much promised and much hyped F-16s, including hyped by the Ukraine's number one, or NATO's number one hype man in Britain, a certain Mr. Paul Mason, who tweeted out feverishly a couple of years ago, F-16s, 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 whilst presumably in the middle of a spice frenzy, allegedly. But this has not worked. The F-16s that do get deployed apparently have been shot down. Somebody's in the comments saying it's obviously inspired by the old 80s movie Firefox, which is like the Cold War era Clint Eastwood vehicle. And it comes back to the fact again, like these they come up with are essentially you've had like a merger of like spy fiction and actual reality now, so that the spies are influenced by the movies of the last 5 years. They're influenced by, as we said before, the movie version of World War II, the movie version of the Cold War, the sort of Pierce Brosnan era James Bond shit. Whereas, of course, in reality, these things don't work. Just as the brilliant British idea of recreating the D-Day landings in Krinky didn't work. Just as, and this is as a side note, the incursion into Kursk cost Ukraine 70,000 killed, wounded, and missing. And by wounded, apparently that's like permanently incapacitated. Yeah. And that's the lower end estimate. Again, another principally British idea. Like you can just see the likes of Chris Donnelly getting very excited about that, taking the fight into Russia. 70,000 killed, wounded, missing later. Oh dear, it's all gone wrong. So quite why anybody keeps listening to these bozos is a good question, because what have they actually done of any real significance over the last like 30 odd years, other than fuck up repeatedly, cost an awful lot of lives and an awful lot of money?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think just as a preface to this, I must admit I'd never heard of the film Firefox before. I Googled it, and it's about stealing a MiG-31 fighter jet. So yes, they probably this is probably precisely the inspiration. But I think that there's several points to make here, which is number one, which is that I think the fact that I saw this claim circulating from the FSB. Now, I'm always skeptical of the claims of any security service, irrespective of where they're based in the world, and also, there have been throughout the conflict, there have been a series of claims made about, say, I forget the details. I think it was a year or two ago where it was claimed that a Russian strike had taken out a sizable number of Western military officers in an underground bunker in Ukraine. Now, that may well be true, or may well have been true, but the Western media went nowhere near this. I think the fact that the Western media feels that, and Reuters no less, the kind of the world's leading news wire, is reporting on this, it lends it like a significant amount of credibility, if only of the arse covering nature. It's like, okay, well, yeah, we did try and plan this, and we better admit it. At least in terms of framing it as, well, the FSB is claiming this. I think that I can totally see this happening. I can totally see this being influenced by, yes, a bunch of morons in Britain who've watched too many movies and have, yes, and still haven't quite given up on trying to recreate them, despite the fact that all of their past efforts have failed. There's another point to make here as well, which is that I think if you go back to, I believe it was it the start of 2020? No, I think, sorry, it was about halfway through 2022. So like in like July, late July, Russian media reported that the FSB had thwarted a Ukrainian operation to steal Russian aircraft, which was This was an operation supervised by NATO, and also had the involvement of the very spooky British government funded and absolutely blatant CIA MI6 front Bellingcat involved in it as well. That operation was effectively, it saw the Ukrainians offer Russian pilots, a large amount of money to defect along with their planes, and then of course the pilots immediately reported this to their superiors, and a sting operation was set up whereby the Ukrainians engaged in discussions with these Russian pilots, not knowing that what they were saying was being monitored. They ended up handing over lots of sensitive intelligence very foolishly, and there was an airfield that was just blown to pieces in a caliber strike by Russia, and so it's like, I mean, again, it seems like they were just trying to recreate this, and that is, I mean, that's a verified failed kind of Ukraine/British connivance that went that went hideously wrong, and led to a large number of people being killed, and also several people within Zelensky's clique getting fired and prosecuted over it. So I don't doubt for a second that this was that this plot was very real, and it ended up failing spectacularly. And I think that it just, I mean, looking back to when the very start of this, when there were, to the extent that the statements of Russian officials were even featured in the media, they were just regarded as reflexively as garbage, lies, that you can't listen to these people, blah blah. And then now almost 4 years into this, the media is finally waking up to the fact that Russian officials do tend to tell the truth. And they tend to be quite forthright in a way that Western politicians aren't at all. It's certainly an interesting development that the media feels it necessary to acknowledge that there might be a bit of value into what officials in Moscow are saying.
Well, yes, and there's a reason why the British ruling class and their government have to indulge in these spy fantasies. That's because the actual hard reality is that British military is an ever declining force, and this flies in the face of all the efforts that have been made in recent years, both the Tory administration and now Keir Starmer, to try and push more people into the military. And yet, despite the hysteria and for all of the fact that in actual fact youth unemployment in Britain has gone up, poverty rates are going up, and yet still they can't actually recruit enough men and women into the ranks of the armed forces. So we've got this story here, which came from a written request by a British MP as to how many were being recruited each year and how many were actually finishing the training. And the numbers remain pathetically low, as can be seen by just observing this table here on the article that we're sharing. And this is an interesting picture, because if you watch anything for any bourgeois in Britain. It's all anti-Russian propaganda, a relentless drumbeat of like played by ex-military officers coming on Sky News saying, like, you know, Tobias Ellwood or Richard Kemp or various others saying, we're under attack, you know, 5 minutes till Russians are steaming up the Thames, you know, that kind of shit. Bilious nonsense spouted by these retired colonels screaming about the Russians every single day for the last 3 years. For that, even like there was a lot of anti-Russian hysteria and various different psychological operations waged by the British government against its own population repeatedly, really over the last 20 years of anti-Russian hysteria. None of this is working. None of this is working in terms of actually getting more younger working class people to actually join the British military. Now, there may be some in the ruling class that are hoping that when the finally does bite, that this will see significant improvements in military recruitment figures, and that may well be right. But given all the propaganda that's been indulged in over the last 20 years, and all of the hysteria and all the screams about Russia's 5 minutes from invading, there is, on some level, this sort of restores a bit of faith in the because even those who aren't aware of like the geopolitics of it, of the nature of the war in Ukraine, even people who are relatively apolitical know that they're being bullshitted. They know that there's not an army of Russians sat off the east coast of perfidious Albion. They know that the Russians aren't steaming up the Thames, and if they were steaming up the Thames to maybe, so we say, destroy the British Parliament, I don't think anybody would actually. But that aside, there's the fact that nobody is rallying to the flag, the fact that none of this bilious patriotic propaganda has worked, really shows us that the British state has a huge problem in terms of its legitimacy, in terms of the willingness of people to sign up for its armies. And that is a big part of the reason why the only thing they've got left is propaganda, James Bond shit style operations, and really just making stuff up, narrative control. Because in terms of hard power, the British haven't got it anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and which is why they, yes, as you say, it's why they cook up ridiculous plots to commandeer Russian jets, then have them shot down. Just for propaganda victories. I think that there was some interesting polling conducted recently, and I think that we may have even discussed it on a past show, which indicated that younger generations of Britons don't give a they don't give a shit about Ukraine at all. Like they don't view Russia as a threat. So it is primarily older generations who still actually lend any credence whatsoever to legacy media, who are buying into this. But even then, in not particularly significant numbers. And I do think when you really break down the figures in this that were revealed in response to this written parliamentary question, basically a third of recruits fail to reach phase 2 of training. Like that is shocking. Like that is absolutely unbelievable. So you have a lot of people who of those few people who still sign up for the military, most just do basic training and bugger off. It's really quite extraordinary. I note that one of our live viewers asked what we thought of Croatia reinstating mandatory military service starting from next year. This is what countries have to do now. Not Russia, where people are enlisting in large numbers voluntarily because they understand that their battle is not with Ukraine. Their battle is with NATO, and that NATO is an existential threat to them, with all sorts of, which we'll get into in due course, insane ideas about its own power, its own capabilities, and a willingness to invest and engage in research and development of all manner of completely crazy and really quite disturbing and dystopian, war fighting methods and tactics. So it's like, this is what countries are going to have to start doing in Europe if they actually want to have militaries. There's been, we've again discussed this before. There's been a lot of talk in Germany about reinstituting mandatory military service. It is overwhelmingly opposed by the public, but I think perhaps a cooked up crisis might be sufficient to push lawmakers into backing this. It's the same across Europe. People are, if you look at polls, even in say like Poland, where you have a very patriotic population and a population which is pretty much universally possessed of a visceral hatred of Russia. The number of Poles who are willing to take up arms and voluntarily join the military now is still quite low. Conscription is all that these countries have available to them in terms of beefing up their military numbers. But it also does create the issue that by doing this, particularly in countries with big populations like Germany and France and the UK, Croatia does not have a large, particularly large population. I believe it's is it about 5 million? No, 4 million. Anyway, the point.
Something like that.
Yeah, the point is the point is that that basically in a large country like Britain, if you are going to be conscripting hundreds of thousands of people, or if not millions of people, or trying to, then that creates the problem that you have a large number of people who are trained in fighting who might not be possessed of a flag shagging love of the United Kingdom. And particularly may be possessed of a loathing for the current political and economic system and the people running it, which runs the risk of inciting an insurrection. I may well have to say actually that I'm in favour of mandatory military service in Britain if it does lead to the disintegration of that monstrous construct, which is well past its sell-by date.
Well, yes. I think that the reason why they hesitate to do it is precisely for the reason that you've just outlined. It's like they got rid of national service in the late 1950s because partly because they couldn't afford to keep a massive land-based army anymore, but also because they didn't like the idea of huge numbers of working class people being trained in arms, because this was potentially dangerous if started. So if it gets to the point where they have to start trying to dragoon people into the armed forces at the age of 18 or 19 or 20, that will create a lot of problems for them. Now, just to answer Svetlana's question about what do the youth in perfidious Albion actually care about, if not Ukraine? Well, same old story as with a lot of other countries, like the younger end of the working class in Britain, being an imperial core nation, finds that they can't afford to do anything, that if they want to get any kind of further education, it costs them either an enormous amount of money or lumbers them with an enormous amount of debt. Housing is very difficult to get hold of. You've got people living with their parents for years and years after they come of age. It's very difficult to do things like starting a family, etc. Youth unemployment is running at is higher levels. So these are the things that people actually care about. The Starmer regime, and he might not be around for too much longer, but it doesn't matter really who succeeds him because they won't be able to actually address any of these questions. But the Labour Party in government now is having no more success at tackling any of this than the Tories were before it, because their only focus was on preserving the financialized system that should have just collapsed in about 2008 to 2010. As it is, the like staggering around with like 0.1 to 0.5% growth per year, and with no economic plan other than just endlessly propping up these zombie banks, etc. So this is the problems. This is the problem facing the worst youth and the entire working class of the country. And nobody in the political elite in old perfidious Albion has a fucking clue what they're going to do about it, because the ruling class will allow no change. Now, I'll just conclude on this particular point with regard to perfidious Albion. Weirdly enough, the last person to actually try and do anything different, even from the point of view of going further to the right, was good old Liz Truss, who's rightly derided for being a moron, which she is. But the fact that she was maneuvered out of power by a bureaucratic establishment coup quite openly. I mean, they weren't even bothering to hide it, that this was what they were doing. And this just shows you, like, well, just how little the possibility there is of actually pursuing any change through this political system. Even a right winger gets removed just simply for being too belligerent and too nakedly populist in terms of her appeals to like the lower middle class Tory base, which is now almost all defected to reform, by the way. Not that reform will change anything, because Nigel's already had the talk from MI5 and MI6 about what is and what isn't acceptable, which is why he's lining up to say, oh, Russia bad, continue the war, etc. So there's no possibility of change in this system. There just isn't. Like, to say that there is to lie to people, which of course, various people like the Greens are very good at doing, and making them think that if you vote for one of these parties that's put on the menu for you at election time, that somehow the outcome will be different. No, it'll be the same, because there is a very powerful machine based in London which is dedicated to preserving things as they are, and that machine is in place in all of the imperial capitals, with different national variations. But in Britain, it's particularly entrenched because it's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it ain't going anywhere until it's forcibly destroyed, basically. Kit, did you have anything more on this, or should we watch the latest NATO propaganda effort?
I think let's watch this video, because just as a bit of background, boys and girls, prepare yourselves for what is a deeply disturbing video. It was released at the start of October by NATO. It received it got universal derision and mockery online. And it's now been delisted. But I've been wanting to talk about this on the show for a while, and then one of our viewers got in touch and said we absolutely have to do a section on this, and I agreed wholeheartedly. So yes, do prepare yourselves though, because this is like genuinely quite frightening. But we shall watch it in its totality.
Right. Okay. So stand by, everybody. Going to be sharing this, and be sure to strap yourselves in, because you're in for a ride. This says an now unlisted video from NATO, which just shows you how well this went down. So here we go.
AI to surveillance systems, from drone to hypersonics. And yet, war will remain an essentially human endeavor. Manipulating the opponent's emotions and just as important as denying access to our spaces. Mind will be a battle space in its own right. Fight in cities. In space. In domain. And on the high seas. We have to relearn the language of deterrence. We expect the outlines of this future to emerge from 2030 onwards. We are in a race against time. There's only one hitch. Predicting the future of war is a flawed enterprise by definition. And to overestimate technology and underestimate our opponent's capacity to adapt to it. We tend to forget that not everything about war will be new. Quite a lot will in fact be old. We understand the trends, but not the timeline. Have a vision of the future of war that suggests dangerous gaps on our end. For some, war in the anthroposphere is not off limits, including psychopharmaceuticals, attacks on the ecosystem, and weaponized bacteria. For other opponents, humans might not have to be in the loop of lethal decision-making by AI. Drone swarms coordinated by robot motherships might sound like science fiction, but all good tech foresight does. And while all parties, NATO and its adversaries, are aiming for short wars, reality often has the last word. For NATO, this means we have no time to lose. Your challenge should choose to accept it, is to take this foresight to war.
Well, I hope you that marvelous piece of absolute that we're provided there by NATO. Just a couple of there's the 2030 stuff again. Seeing this come up over and over again in British government papers, in like EU calculations. Well, it's going to be we're going to be ready by 2030. Going to be ready by 2030. We just got to hang on until then. So that's interesting. They think in 5 years they can turn around like decades and decades of industrial decline. There you go. Shows you what they're smoking. The other point is that a lot of that is like the threats from the scary Kremlin. They're trying to portray it as if this was something from like a Command and Conquer video game from like the late 90s. I'm surprised they didn't have an AI version of Stalin. Like the talk of like psychopharmaceuticals, bacteriological warfare, etc. That's all stuff that they've been rumbled for doing. Remember the biolab story about the biolabs in Ukraine? Victoria Nuland sort of stumbled into confessing with there in a strange exchange with Marco Rubio. The Americans have outsourced to former Soviet states a lot of the time, including, of course, Ukraine, but also Armenia. Also, like I think there's biolabs in Kazan as well, which the Russians alleged that the labs they found in Ukraine were working on stuff like how to manipulate like crop yields, how to like design like a virus that attacked like Russian agricultural facilities. And as for like psychopharmaceuticals and stuff like that, and the war on the human brain. Well, who invented MK Ultra? Who gave us that? That was the United States that gave us that. Who specialize in attempts at like psychological manipulation via both, just purely mental means and also pharmaceutical means? Well, again, that's Britain and the United States who are the world leaders in that. And as for the battle spaces, the one thing we should take really seriously is when they say we'll have to fight in cities. I'll conclude on this point. What they mean by that is they mean cities in Europe, but not against Russians, because fundamentally that's what NATO's always been about from 1949 onwards, which is controlling Europe on behalf of its own corrupt ruling classes, but also on the United States, and making sure that market is firmly under control. So yes, the cities that will be forced in will be in the West, but it won't be against the Russians. It'll be against their own populations. Kit, I throw to you for your review of this stunning cinematic video game trailer.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to know where to begin. I might add that this was the script and creative oversight of this video was produced by a woman called Florence Gaub, who caused pretty significant controversy at the start of 2022 when she made a wide variety of just disgustingly xenophobic comments about Russians, about how basically saying that they were backwards Asiatic hordes who didn't place any value on human life, and they were not as advanced as Western Europeans and all this other stuff. She quite clearly this was seen as a feather in her cap, and she's since been promoted to the director of the NATO Defence College Research Division. So God help us all. For a start, I totally agree that this is all of pretty much everything that they were talking about. It wasn't about fighting Russia or China. It's about the target is domestic populations of NATO countries. And I think that I might add as well, I mean, you mentioned 2030 cropping up again. About 5 years ago, NATO's in-house innovation network, it published a number of papers throughout the year based on the concept of warfighting 2040. Now, a lot of those papers were focused on the quote-unquote militarization of brain science and cognitive warfare, like winning, not only winning propaganda battles and psychological warfare, but also looking into, like brain implants to physically enhance soldiers, so they have, so they're resistant to sleep, so they don't suffer from extreme heat. That they don't rely so much on food and water, and all this other just complete and utter insanity. And I might add as well that all of this has been removed from the web since then. I wonder why that is. They had among those papers was a number of quite literal sci-fi fantasy stories written by similar people who are similarly to Gaub, futurists, who sketched all of these fictional speculative narratives of how how NATO would enter the cognitive sphere, and cognitive warfare would be covered by Article 5, and a war with China and Russia in the cognitive realm could be triggered this way. And it's just like, I mean, honestly, it's like it was embarrassing doggerel, but it's clear they haven't given up on this. They are determined to, because, and this ties in with our discussion of Britain's kind of collapsing military, is Britain for a very long time has been focused on this notion that you can win wars purely in people's minds. Like there is genuine Ministry of Defence doctrine openly published, where it is stated, psychological warfare is the most important form of warfare because wars can be won when the physical contest cannot, which is a great strategy until you get nuked. Like
Well, yeah.
I think, as I've said this before, but I mean, in the event that there was all-out war between NATO and Russia, I sincerely doubt that that Russian soldiers are going to be wandering around the ruins of Berlin and Paris saying, "Oh, pity we lost the information war."
Well, we lost that narrative. What a shame.
Yeah. No, indeed. Just damn it. But I think that it does speak to it speaks to the fact that these fantasies endure, and the reason that they endure is not because NATO genuinely believes that the Chinese and the Russians are creating cyborg soldiers, or that that they actually have an edge in psychological warfare. It's because they are losing control so quickly of their own populations, and they desperately need to reassert it at all costs, quite literally.
Yes. And this actually leads to a question from Alistair in Prague, Kit, that comes for you. It's related to show favourite Chris Donnelly. Alistair has asked, could you summarize who this guy is and what his career trajectory has been?
Yeah, sure. So Chris Donnelly, he started out as a Ministry of Defence apparatchik, and he worked for a component of the Ministry of Defence during the Cold War, which was the Soviet, I think it was called the Soviet Studies Centre, and a number of prominent kind of proxy war commentators like Keir Giles also came up through the same kind of networks. In the 90s, he was promoted to he became the key advisor to successive NATO secretary generals, and he also led the expansion of NATO in the 1990s into Central and Eastern Europe. I had spoken to people who knew him at the time who thought that he was a nutter then, and that he had some very far out views on Russia, and he believed that the collapse of the Soviet Union was military deception, and actually the Red Army was being withdrawn from Europe in order to conglomerate them in one space so they could strike the West more effectively. A coiled spring theory, I think he called it, and so he was regarded as on the fringes, even then, and following. I believe it was in the early 2000s, he leaves Brussels and comes back to the UK and carries on working for the MOD, gets moved out of there, and then presumably because he was regarded as an absolute nutter, and then sets up the Institute for Statecraft, which very quickly, from about 2009 onwards, starts banging the drum that, we're at war with Russia, we just don't know it yet. And we need to restructure our societies from schools upwards to be in war fighting mode against Russia. And this is something that we mentioned many times on the show, but it does bear repeating. In July 2014, there was an essay published on the Institute for Statecraft website, which stated we need to isolate Russia diplomatically, we need to sanction them economically, and we need to demonize Russia via propaganda. This will then lead to conflict of the old-fashioned sort that Great Britain and the West could win. So, Ukraine was viewed as the beachhead by Donnelly and his minions at this very early post-Maidan stage, and Donnelly was closely involved with the fascist paramilitary groups who were at the forefront of the quote-unquote anti-terrorist operation, which was the brutal crackdown by Maidan authorities on Ukraine's Russophone population, primarily in the east and the south of the country. He is a highly influential figure. He is now guiding Britain's proxy war strategy, and in leaked documents and emails that we've reported on at the Grey Zone, he's very clear that Britain's, on top of escalating endlessly against Russia, London needs to be focused on dragging the US into this as far as possible, because this was meant to be World War III. Except actually it's not really worked out that way. And we are now witnessing the unraveling of Donnelly's fantasies on, in Donbass, vast steppe. But I mean, that doesn't mean that he's still not dangerous. And he's still not cooking up insane plots to try and push the Russians over the edge and provoke some serious escalation, like the bombing of civilian infrastructure, which Russia has very, very rigorously attempted to avoid since the start of this. Alex and I have been talking about writing a book about the British role in the war in Ukraine, and Donnelly, if that does come to pass, I hope it does. Donnelly will be a subject of some interest in that work, and will be
deserving of his own chapter at the very least.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So, Chris, if you're interested, we'd love to talk to you. Feel free to come on the show. You can even, again, I repeat my offer, you can even bring Paul Mason with you. I think that's a good exploration or introduction to the career of Mr. Donnelly. Certainly, as Kit says, it's not just one man who thinks that. There's an awful lot of them inside the Ministry of Defence, MI6, the Foreign Office, and the networks of British power, who still all have these like fevered delusions about the nature of the ability of the British to still thrash those damn Russians, etc., who still think they're fighting the Battle of Balaclava in the 1850s. They will rapidly be dissipating these delusions. I should say thank you to everybody who's watching this show on X, by the way. 135 of you watching on there, compared to a paltry 154 for the Telegraph's broadcast about Ukraine. Thank you to all those of you watching on X and YouTube, because we are now beating the employer of Colonel Richard Kemp, about whom more in future episodes. So when we come to our media twats list, in fact, that might be a great show to do for the end of the year. So if you're keen on seeing media twats, do let us know in the chat. So a lot of other things for the program, Kit. We have seen recently the visit of a certain Mr. Al-Jilani, about whom there was much discussion in the very fine interview we did recently with our very fine guest, Kevork Almassian, geopolitical commentator, I think it's fair to say exiled in Berlin. He was talking to us about the fate of Syria and the Al-Jilani regime. Well, Al-Jilani himself, or Al-Sharaa, or whatever the hell his name is, has been very busy recently. He's been over to the States to essentially Syria to perpetual debt slavery by signing up to a whole load of IMF advice. And I want you to bear in mind that one of the things that Kevork Almassian told us in that interview last week was that the Syrian economy would be restructured basically so it would be an appendage of the imperial masters, an appendage of the United States, Britain, but also the more local managers such as Turkey and Israel would decide what the Syrian economy was allowed to have. So there'll be no manufacturing capacity. There'll be no resource extraction there. There'll be no industry. It'll all be like services, and anything that is extracted from Syria, such as oil and wheat, will go outside of the country to be processed and turned into a commodity. And then it'll be imported back in at by Western companies. This is how they control you, with, of course, the Saudis and the wretched Gulf tyrannies having their role in there as well. But the point about all of this is, what we wanted to highlight was a truly insane from Tom Barak, who's this clown who's the ambassador to Turkey, US ambassador to Turkey, who has the habit of making rather strange confessions, or like posting something so ridiculous that he ends up revealing something. So yes, the other day, 2 days ago, this marks a pivotal moment in Syria's history and in the global fight against terrorism. Syria has officially become the 90th partner in the world to join the global coalition to defeat ISIS. Well, this is certainly a miracle, but considering that nominally president of Syria with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I couldn't help but laugh at this one, but I'll throw to Kit now your reaction to this. And doesn't this reveal just what an enormous farce the war on terror really was?
Yeah, well, indeed, and I might add as well that, I mean, it's just it literally, as Barak is chummily embracing Yolani and announcing that Syria is now part of the global coalition against ISIS. Emails have been released in which Jeffrey Epstein emails Tom Barak asking him to send him a photo of a child to make him smile. I mean, I think that raises all manner of questions about why Barak is embracing a member of ISIS with such enthusiasm, and what might happen, what else might be lurking in his cupboard if he refused to play ball. But yes, I mean, this is just it is the kind of thing that if it was in like a thick of it style political satire, you would think was ridiculous. It beggars belief that the HTS is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Al-Nusra. Its members are all drawn from the ranks of those groups. It collaborated with those groups very closely. Yolani, as Kevork said, very serendipitously, is in a jail in Iraq for carrying out mass murders. And then in March 2011 is miraculously released right when the protests in Syria against Assad are starting that led to the quote unquote revolution. It raises very, very obvious questions about who he's been working for this whole time, and whether the scenes that we're seeing play out now were at least kind of sketched nearly a decade and a half ago. Now, I might add as well, and this is, I would urge again our viewers and listeners to check out our interview with Kevork, because it was fantastic. If I do say so myself, and it was very he had a lot of very interesting insights into how we got to where we are now, and he also with some amazing foresight predicted exactly the kind of things that we've seen in the days and weeks since we spoke to him. But the point is during that interview, I made the point that it has been confirmed by US officials and also the now former head of MI6, Richard Moore, that a direct relationship between the CIA, the State Department, and MI6 and HTS existed for many years leading up to their seizure of power in Syria. But not only that, the US, but primarily Britain, created all of the structures, particularly the mechanisms and organizations of repression within HTS's Syria. Like the British created the Free Syrian Police, which was a police force that operated in opposition-occupied territory. They cooperated with Sharia courts. They helped stone women to death for breaching al-Nusra's very strict religious legal codes. They are now Syria's national police force. But the infamous white helmets are now that provide emergency services for Syria. So, they a perfect puppet state. But not only, I mean, I'd go further. Actually, I'd say a perfect colony has been created in Syria from the West perspective. The issue from here, though, and I do think that this is I think that there, as we've discussed before on the show, you have different powers who have different divergent objectives in Syria, which could lead to Syria's breakup. Now, some people might say that a balkanized Syria is exactly what has been wanted all along, and I'm sure that there are certain elements of the power structure, certain people, certain groups who for whom that is the objective and has been the objective all along. This will cause an enormous number of problems, though. And it does seem that Britain and America, with London in the lead, have simply wanted to remove Assad and then shunt HTS in his place, and then leave Syria kind of as is in terms of its geography. While yes, reducing it to the status of IMF debt slave, and a market for Western goods and a source of resource extraction. But I mean, there are dark clouds on the horizon for that project. And I think we could see a disintegration of the country in not too long, to be brutally honest.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, and this is to a series of problems for the imperialists in that they can't agree amongst themselves, as you indicate in your commentary there, exactly what they wanted to do with it. They know that they wanted to break Assad, but they didn't know what they wanted to put in its place. I think the British would probably love some kind of puppet state that they could run, but that makes certain factions in both Washington and Tel Aviv rather nervous. There are those in Tel Aviv who have failed to beat Hamas, would love to seize and control significant portions of Syria in order to claim a victory for the Israeli army that, of course, it has been unable to claim over 2 years of war. Plus, grabbing land in Syria takes the political pressure off Netanyahu with regard to further annexations in the West Bank, which is problematic. So they've got a very strong motivation to allow a unified, stable state, even one that is completely controlled by external forces. You've also got the competing agendas in Ankara amongst the AKP and the Erdogan, some of whom want to run Syria as a puppet state, some of whom want to essentially absorb a large section it into Turkey itself. Some of them try and destroy the Kurdish forces there that have previously been allied or still are allied to the United States. There's a lot of different agendas here which don't actually chime with each other. The thing they all agreed upon was they wanted to get rid of Assad. Okay, they've done that. Now they don't know what they want to do, or they can't agree on what they want to do. The unfortunate thing is, of course, the Syrian population gets ground between the wheels of these of the imperialist bloc. We can only hope that a unified resistance movement can emerge that can reject the HTS regime and can see it for what it is, which is a colonial management structure imposed principally by the US, Britain, Turkey, and Israel, and also reject and fight against control of their country by Turkey and Israel, which will only lead to immiseration for the population there. Now, final point this week, which we did want to cover, which is that there's been a lot of talk over the past few weeks about the the crisis in Mali. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what has gone on here, Mali is one of a trio of Sahel states that has managed to successfully evict the hated French from having a military presence. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger were all French colonies where, upon their independence, the French not only imposed a currency system on them in the form of the CFA franc, which enabled the French central bank to essentially control the monetary policy of these supposedly independent countries, but also left a significant military presence there. And added to that, in order to entrench that military presence there, said that they had to create a state of near perpetual warfare to evict supposed Al-Qaeda element from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. This led to a revolt within the officer corps of all of the armies in the aforementioned countries, who imposed a radical nationalist regimes in these three countries, who formed the Alliance of Sahel States. Now, all of them suffer from these so-called Al-Qaeda incomes. It has been long speculated about, and I think with a good deal of proof now accumulated, that if the French, British, and Americans directly running these Al-Qaeda insurgencies are at the very least supporting them in some way or another, because the weaker they can make these Sahel states, the more that they can bog them down in an endless war against a terrorist group, the less chance there is of them actually being able to properly develop, the more chances of the population there growing frustrated and stopping supporting the radical nationalist regime by these officer movements. So this is the situation. The capital of Mali has apparently been put under siege by what's described as an Al-Qaeda affiliate. Now, again, remind ourselves who's ultimately behind Al-Qaeda. First of all, there is the Saudis and the Gulf states, where a lot of the money comes from. Behind them stand, well, France, Britain, and the United States. So when you hear that Mali is under siege, the Malian capital is under siege by Al-Qaeda, well, that's ultimately an auxiliary force, just like it was in Syria. It's a mercenary force of the imperialist states. That's what's really going on. So any claim that you ever hear that, oh, well, we're fighting Al-Qaeda, this is either a lie or an outright manipulation, just the same way the British state used to claim that it was looking to disrupt the activities of loyalist paramilitaries in the occupied 6 counties of Ireland, when we all know damn well who they worked for. But Kit, I'll throw to you for your analysis of the current situation.
Yeah, well, okay. So, I mean, Mali, yes, there is a lot of talk at the moment in the Western media about the prospect of the country falling to an Al-Qaeda affiliate. Its acronym is JNIM. I shan't embarrass myself by mispronouncing its full lengthy Arabic name on this program. But the point is that what had the on top of creating an insurgency nuisance that the government has to deal with, they've also managed to cut off the fuel supply to major cities, including Mali's capital. And this is, creating very, very, very serious, problems in every conceivable regard. So it might be premature to talk about Mali falling to this group, as has perhaps aspirationally and optimistically been reported by the Western media. It's having a devastating effect. Now, we have spoken about the alliance of Sahel states previously. We've talked about how France has run away formally with its tail between its legs from the region. We've talked about how the alliance, which is Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and potentially more countries are wanting to join this alliance. They are breaking away from ECOWAS, this kind of neo-colonial structure which immiserates the local population, ensures that they can't export anywhere apart from Europe, ensures that they can't buy goods from anywhere else bar Europe, and stunts development and enforces dependency on the population. The rise of Chinese and Russian influence in Africa has served as a major counterweight to that neo-colonial oppression led by the French, but enforced and supported by Britain and Germany and the US. It's important to note as well that one of the really major problems from the perspective of the Anglo-Americans and the god awful French. Sorry to any French viewers. Don't take it don't take it personally. It's the people leading your country the issue as ever. But the problem is the all of these supposed juntas in Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali are really, really, really popular. And when they do things like forcibly seize French companies operating on their territory or ban BBC World Service, people are cheering quite literally in the streets. Right, so that the on screen now, Alex has a fascinating paper produced by Ndongo Sambo Silla. We've got to get him on the show sometime. He's a Senegalese economist, and this paper is called "The Crisis of French Imperialism in Africa." It's free to read. I strongly urge you to read it. He cites a poll from January 2024. Of Malians, which found that 81% of the country believed the general situation had improved since the quote-unquote military coup, which brought the current government to power. 99% of the population were satisfied with the work of the security forces for protecting them and for, ridding their country of foreign influence. More than 9 Malians out of 10 think that they believe that the general situation in the country will improve over the next 6 months, and 90% of Malians supported greater ties between Mali and Russia and China. These are pretty astonishing figures, and these are emanating from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, which is one of those very spooky German foundations. They would have every reason to try and fudge the figures, and there's a similar story in other Sahel alliance states. People in Burkina Faso are very, very, very happy about what their leaders are doing and think that their rulers have their best interests at heart, and which they can see very, very plainly. So in that context, trying to inflict misery on the local population via denying them fuel and in turn access to basic goods, that is a good way of turning people against the government. Whether it will be sufficient enough to whether it would be sufficient to turn the entire population or a majority of the population against the government remains to be seen. But this is a pretty dire situation presently. And it would be entirely unsurprising if this is being facilitated, encouraged, sponsored, directed by France, Britain, America, because you can't have that contagion effect spreading across Africa, can you?
Well, no. And always keep this in mind, everybody. The head of Al-Qaeda in Syria is now the president. He's now welcome in the White House. Yeah, Donald Trump was there grinning away with al-Jilani this week. If, God forbid, Al-Qaeda affiliate, shall we say, is to win in Mali, that will be a victory for it. And whoever the leader there is, the Al Qaeda group, will probably be ushered into the presidency and be welcomed to Paris by a grinning Emmanuel Macron. So this is what you need to bear in mind. There's been an awful lot of propaganda in the West about the Muslims, the barbaric Muslims. Well, the most barbaric Muslims of all fight as mercenaries for the. So there's a big lie that you can now use the situation in Syria. If you're having an argument with some reactionary fool who's imbibed a load of anti-Muslim propaganda over the last 20 years, you can just point to Al-Jilani shaking hands with Donald fucking Trump. And image alone, which should tell even the most block-headed of individual just what a lie the war on terror really was. Because you are supposed to believe that just as with the war on drugs, just as with the threats to wage war on the cartels, these organizations, which are created by American, British, and French imperialism, that they're now interested in waging a war on them. No. They're interested in using them as a justification for military action. They've always been on the same side. Look at all the things we've covered over the last year that we've been doing this program. Look at all the conflicts we've talked about. Look at the going all the way back to the 1990s. Look at the fact that Al Qaeda was in Bosnia. Al Qaeda was in Kosovo. Like every time they've got some serious operation they want to pull off, where it's either a majority Muslim country or there's a significant Muslim minority. Who turns up? Al Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS. These are all like ultra-reactionary, vicious, psychotic forces, which are fascistic formations, but they fight for imperialism, and they always will. Where are Al-Jilani's crusaders when it comes to Palestine? Nowhere. Why? Because that's not what they're designed for. They're designed by the Gulf states and by the British and by the Americans to be mercenary forces for the empire, and that is all they will ever be. And so again, if you or to take this in another direction, if you know some foolish Muslim who was like, you're saying, "Oh, come on, let's have at it, brothers, down with Assad." Well, congratulations, you just delivered a country back into the clutches of the West again. That you say you hate, but you actually, because if you're a Muslim who supports like the blessed revolution in Syria, what you're supporting is the return of Syria to colonial domination. So congratulations, and you've given Israel a huge gift. So people need to look at like who is behind all of this stuff and like do an analysis which goes deeper than the surface level, which we here on Decline and Fall hope to provide to you. And this is a key part of our raison d'etre. Kit, that brings us to a close for this week's live show. We've had a good deal of people tuning in. I think we've had probably too many questions to answer in the next minutes or so. So I think what we'll do is we'll take the questions we haven't addressed today to a specific question response program, because we've got a lot of good questions. I think we could do like a specific show on that next week. So
absolutely, and I would. Sorry to interrupt you, Alex. I would say, anyone, just in general, who has questions for us, drop us an email, leave a comment, or on Substack or on YouTube. We will try and answer it. We're very open to that, and I think a Q&A special is a fantastic idea, Alex.
Right, that is then the confirmation. We will be having a purely Q&A special coming up very soon, so we will answer all your questions then. Thanks everybody who joined us today live. We have had over 500 of you now live, which is excellent. We kicked the Telegraph's ass on terms of getting live viewers there. So, Telegraph lads, you might have a bunch of ex-military clowns working for you, but you can't compete with us. Apparently, truth will out. So, thanks to everybody who's tuned in this week. We will be back to you again very soon. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. And I'll throw to the Kit in the once and future socialist Yugoslavia for the final word this week.
Final word. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a blast. And yeah, really thrilling and flattering and humbling to see so many of you tuning in. And yeah, see you very, very soon. Take care. God bless you.